Welcome to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast, where we explore the exciting science behind heart rate variability. The material discussed in this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. Please check with your medical provider to make sure any suggestions or strategies are right for you. Visit us at the OptimalHRV.com website to learn more about the Optimal HRV app, download a free copy of Matt's book, Heart Rate Variability, and also get show notes and additional resources around heart rate variability and its applications.
We are back with another Heart Rate Variability podcast. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate your time listening today. I am fortunate enough to be on the podcast again with my good friends, Mr. Matt Bennett, Mr. David Hopper. Gentlemen, happy 2 days past Valentine's Day. Hope you had a nice holiday with your significant others, family, friends, all of the above.
Nothing parties like Valentine's Day on a Monday, you know? Yeah. With the first grade teacher. Yeah.
Especially the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday where
she stayed up till 6:30, so I gotta give her credit. She came home in her Valentine's Day pajamas because it was very romantic when you got a Monday Valentine's Day with the first grade teacher. So lots of fun at the Bennett house.
That's fantastic. How about you, Dave?
Well, we actually did a little family getaway for Valentine's weekend, but it was the whole family in a hotel room. So with two small kids, there's little sleep and a whole bunch of craziness, but lots of fun. So yeah,
memorable if nothing else.
How about you, Jeff? What was it like at the Summers house?
Oh, our 4-year-old daughter just totally got into it. Had so much fun at school. We, instead of doing just a daddy mommy date, we did a whole date out with the four of us, had a nice dinner. Kids managed pretty well considering their first time at a sort of a fancy restaurant. So it was fun. Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Awesome.
And while romance is obviously associated with Valentine's Day, that is not the topic of our podcast today, though maybe it should be another one. That would be an interesting thing to dive into.
HRVs.
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. We want to talk about exercise today, and we've got some unique perspectives, certainly one in particular, Mr. Hopper, that we didn't have in the past when we've spoken about this. I don't know, probably going back 12, 18 months now, Matt. So we really wanted to bring Dave's experiences as a professional athlete to our audience a little bit, and how HRV is really important in terms of his training, how he sort of focuses his regimen around and utilizes HRV as part of that. And then, Matt, and even less so myself, in terms of how we're using that for our sort of exercise planning and routines. So with that, Dave, I think it would be super helpful for you to kind of give our audience a background in terms of your experience as an athlete, playing, college sports, professional, fighting, that kind of stuff, because I think that brings a whole nother level of credibility in terms of your experience training, because you really focused on it at a level that certainly I never did. And Matt, back in 1875 when he was in college, didn't have the ability to. So
1875.
Wow.
Yes. And to Matt's credit there too, being a collegiate athlete is no joke either. It's right at that level as well. But I was extremely fortunate, growing up in a family who focused on exercise. That was my family's every day. If you didn't get up first thing and exercise, there was something wrong with you. And that was kind of how I grew up seeing the world, and then found out that was not the actual case for everybody. We were in fact the weird people. But it was awesome growing up that way, because I exercise was my world. We had we weren't a very wealthy family by any means, but we had a gym in every house. And that was just my dad's number one priority, was that we had to have weightlifting equipment. So I grew up just seeing it every day, watching him do it, watching my mom do it, and reading Muscle and Fitness magazine and all that, which sprung me into being a personal trainer at a very young age, and going on from there, being a strength and conditioning coach for all different levels of athletes, and then my own career as well. Obviously the exercise was a big portion, and I came up playing hockey, boxing, and doing all that, and then I got the opportunity to go and do that professionally as well, which was really cool, being a professional athlete, getting paid to exercise, which honestly was my dream growing up.
It's so many young boys' dreams, right? I mean, I know
Yes.
me growing up, I was going to be in the NBA, man. There's no doubt.
Yeah, that's the way, man. If you have that strong enough. And mine wasn't to be a professional athlete. Mine was to get paid to exercise.
That's actually very unique. I mean, that's different. There's no doubt. It's not like the fame and the money. It's you just love to exercise and you wanted that to be your livelihood. Yeah.
So that is, has always been my top priority is, you can ask my wife, like I said, we had a quick getaway, and my only question was, well, where's the gym? But in doing athletics, it was so unfortunate that I didn't know about heart rate variability, that heart rate variability wasn't more of a thing, because man, how much that would have helped myself, the other athletes that I would train with, knowing when we were burning out, when we were peaking, all those kinds of things, that would have helped tremendously. And of course, nowadays, we see that it is very popular in athletics to be tracking your HRV, to be reacting to your HRV with your training routine, and that's how I use it now as well. So now, I'm just your average old dude.
Average old dude that plans.
You talked about your workouts, my friend.
Exactly.
But yes, I exercise at least 5 days every week with weights. I do Jiu Jitsu at least 2, if not 3 days a week. And I just do everything I can to involve movement in everything that I do. And HRV is my biggest guide with that. So if we get into some more technical aspects with that, you guys are familiar with the concept of periodization training, or have you? Okay.
No.
All right. So periodization training is what most athletes would use, is what most people who are on any kind of weightlifting routine would use. And it's just essentially that your workout regimen is laid out in such that that for this many weeks, you're going to be going for this as your goal. And then for this many weeks, you're going to be going for this as your goal, to make sure that, you peak for a competition, that you peak to be in season, or in a sport like basketball, Matt, that you're peaking to be, for playoff time. Yeah. That type of thing. And now it's that I'm peaking for, you want to peak for summer when you're an old guy, right? That's your focus. So that was predominantly the way that most would gear their workouts, and it still is very used today. But HRV has shown that if you follow your HRV instead of the best laid out exercise program, that you will always get better results. And that is so cool, just by listening to your body. So that's what I do, and how I use it is I have a global plan laid out for myself, that is a year-round program. And then I will use my HRV as a means to say, okay, even though today I had a heavy day planned, instead I'm going to do a modified workout, or I'm going to do, instead of doing exercises that are going to be less stable. Like say, for example, if I had a standing military press was going to be one of the exercises for today, and I had a low HRV, I might say, all right, well, I'm not going to ditch that, but maybe I'll do it in a stabilized way. So I'm going to do a seated military press instead. That type of stuff. Those are some easy swaps, some ways that HRV can help guide your training, not only from a direct intensity perspective, but from even picking select exercises within your program. And I'm sorry if I'm getting way too detailed with some of
Not
this.
at all. This is great.
Okay, yeah. So that's where I go with my program, and then Jiu Jitsu. Are you guys familiar with?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay. So in fighting professionally, Jiu Jitsu is something that I did a ton of, and something that I got rather good at.
I bet you have to as a professional fighter.
Yes. So I continue to do it, and man, that is one of the hardest workouts ever. It seriously is. I couldn't think of anything more exhausting than doing that. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Jiu Jitsu, it's essentially it's like wrestling with joint locks and chokes. It's how you would compare it. And I can see very clearly in my HRV the nights that I did jujitsu before, what my HRV looked like waking up the next morning, where I go, yeah, you know what, I'm probably gonna swap out some of my exercises for today, or you know what, maybe today's a better day to just stretch. Those types of things. But as a result, knock on wood, I haven't been injured. I don't.
That's amazing.
I don't really deal with any of that kind of stuff. I don't. Obviously, you can overwork yourself, you can injure yourself very easily just pressing on through, just pushing forward. But when you're following your HRV, when you're following, the actual messages that your body is telling you, you don't miss these things. And when it's saying, hey, dude, this is your second day of being in the dumps with your HRV, maybe take a break. You should listen. So yeah, those are some ways that I use HRV within my training. And I'm sorry, I kind of jumped all over there, but give you an idea there.
Yeah, Dave, I'd love to ask you a follow-up question there. It's interesting, the difference between our households, because my household was all about winning. It wasn't about the exercise. The exercise was, my dad was my high school basketball coach, which meant something in Indiana. So it wasn't like my parents were working out, but it was all about winning and having a 6'7" son who was maybe the least athletic person on the face of the earth. It was all about, I had those weird looking platform shoes. If you ever watched the Seinfeld episode where Kramer had them, I was doing yoga before we had any clue what yoga was in the Midwest, back in the late 80s, where there wasn't I don't know if there was a yoga studio within 1,000 miles of Franklin, Indiana at the time. So I would love to hear this kind of from your perspective, because I think when I look back at how HRV would have shaped my training for that performance, to win the basketball game, always trying to peak on game day. And we really never talked about peaking on game day. It just wasn't, because we had no real data. There was no data to say pushing yourself hard the day before the game would impact your performance at the game. Now, we talked about that a little bit, but there wasn't any way to quantify it. I kind of wonder, with a very different sort of approach to your, how you got into kind of high level competition. Let's throw it back into your teens, into your 20s. How do you think HRV, if you would have had that data back then, sort of how your training, your approach might have been different?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we would do back then, for what we would call a fight camp, which was 6 to 8 weeks typically, and that was, you were training 6 days a week, typically 3-4 times a day, and and actually I always added in my own extra workouts because I couldn't not.
You loved it so.
Yes. But you start on Monday, and I always had my base weightlifting routine that was my separate workout that I would do pretty much every day, regardless of what was coming. And we go in for morning practice. We do morning practice. Then we go home, and I would do a little bit of work, and I would nap, and then I would go back to the gym. We would do conditioning, then we would do our night practice, and depending on what was all happening, we would either we were forced to do Bikram Yoga as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
Which is, oh my gosh, such an amazing workout. Huge fan of that still to this day. But you're pushing yourself to no end, and like to think about that, you're literally exercising 6 hours a day or more, and then you're just expecting your body to hold up through this. And granted, you're young, right? This is I think I turned pro when I was 20. So a young guy, so my body could definitely handle a bit more. If I tried to exercise for 6 hours a day right now, I don't know how I respond. My HRV,
especially that kind of exercise, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a hike or something, but yeah, it's a whole different deal.
It is. But so you're doing this, and then all along you're cutting weight as well, because for fighting, you want to try to get into a lower weight class where possible. So for the most part, I would be around 205 pounds going into a fight camp, and I would fight at 185, which wasn't that bad of a cut in terms of what a lot of other athletes, who are within wrestling and mixed martial arts, that kind of stuff would do. Because typically by the time we got down to those last 2 weeks, I was typically around 195 pounds. And to cut 10 pounds in 2 days is, granted, I'm saying this with a grain of salt, is no big deal. But
Matt's going to want to throw some disclaimers on that pretty soon here for all our listeners in terms of the health aspect of cutting weight like that. But we understand the reality of wrestling is much different than everyday people, right?
Yes, that was extremely unhealthy and very much not sustainable. So not a thing that you'd want to do outside of a competition like that. But to be able to see how my body was doing throughout that, like I can't tell you how many athletes I sat next to who would go through an entire training camp, and at the end you would see them get injured and not be able to fight. Like they went this whole way, and then they got injured in that last bit, and they couldn't fight. Actually, it happened to me once as well. So I tried to fight at 170 twice.
Wow.
And the first time I tried to do that, it went horribly. I tried to cut over 20 pounds in like 3 days. And I can remember I was so thirsty. I was like, if I go out for a run right now, I can drink some water. Like that was the thought in my head, because weigh-ins were the next day. And I can remember being like, okay, I'm going to just go for a short run, then I can drink some water, and then I'll be okay. And it was, outside of Chicago here, so snowing and icy out. And I literally was so delusional and so out of it that I slipped and smashed my face into the sidewalk, and I wound up with stitches over my eyebrow, and I got disqualified from the fight.
Oh no, all that work.
Yeah. And it's just, frankly, stupidity. But you see that happening all the time in that type of stuff. And the next time that I fought at 170 as well was it was just horrible trying to go through that. But if I had a better metric, if other guys that I fought alongside of had that metric of looking at HRV and going, and going, oh man, we're winding down here, and look how low your HRV is dropping. What do you think that is going to wind up looking like for when you actually step into the ring? What is this going to do to you? If I had seen that, my HRV was going from, wherever it was and dropping down to like zero, right? As my body is starved for nutrition, starved for water, all of that. And I could tell you that I felt much better. But feeling isn't enough to push you to do something different. But when you have that objective number staring you in the face saying, dude, you're overtraining, or dude, you're cutting too much weight, or, you need to change what you are doing here before you get injured, it is, it's that red light blinking in your face. So that's, that would have been so powerful to have that, to say that, oh, look at how my HRV is trending each week. On Monday, I'm looking really good after a full day of rest on Sunday. And then as the week goes on, you can just watch my HRV drop. And is it a wonder why all these guys are getting injured on Friday, on Saturday? And no, obviously when we can see the data right there, you're most likely to get injured when your reaction time is low and you have those going on.
Yeah, Dave, thanks. That's great background. And I think to your point, it's so powerful to be able to predict things like injury. Matt, you talked about performance and being able to predict when do you peak for specific periods of time as an athlete. That's incredibly important, but also how do you avoid injury? How do you avoid burnout? How do you avoid those kinds of things? Because it's all interrelated. So that's great background and interesting, Dave. So, I guess for me, I'm not being a professional athlete, someone who's always enjoyed exercise, always played sports, 2 small kids, as probably everybody knows. How are you guys using it in your day-to-day life now, right? So everybody's striving, we're still relatively new in the new year. Resolutions, hopefully for most, are holding firm. People always want to get more exercise. I shouldn't say always, but many people often want to get more exercise. They don't want to get hurt, especially if you're trying to lose weight and do those kinds of things. You're training for something that maybe isn't normal. You want to run your first marathon or first half marathon, your first 10K, whatever it is. You want to get hurt. You want to train right. How do we bring this into the everyday person's life where we're not working out 6 hours a day? We're lucky. We're doing our best to get an hour in, but we don't want to get hurt. And we do want to perform when we do our first 10K or 5K or marathon or whatever it is. All those things still are valid. So would love to get, your perspective on that as well. Because I think it's important for a lot of the folks that are listening that, are in the 99.9% that aren't professional athletes, right? So Matt, I don't know, maybe you want to jump in. I know this is
sure.
That you've spent a lot of time researching and certainly put into practice in your own life.
Yeah. So I think what I'm seeing, and Dave, I'd love to get your eyes and what you've been seeing as well, is the shift away from intensity. And I think heart rate variability in the professional, collegiate, or really hardcore weekend warriors who are sometimes just as dedicated as anybody else to this, really has put that focus on recovery in a major way. The interesting thing that I see as somebody who tries to keep a general eye on nutrition, on exercise, on sleep, which means a lot of times I'm reading books. And I've learned over the years that it takes a couple of years for what's going on in journal articles, research labs, to get published in a book. So there's a little bit of a delay there. So I'm always interested in things that come through like my news feeds of articles now starting to make it into books. And one of the things I think I'm seeing, Dave, is this idea of pushing yourself isn't maybe necessarily what we're created to do. Like running a marathon was never really evolutionarily outside something that happened in Greece during the wars over there. It wasn't really
out of necessity.
Yeah, it wasn't adaptive. We always love to glorify the hunter-gatherers, which in some ways is where a lot of our brain development and neurobiology and physiological happened. And there was this theory, I think probably about 10 years ago, with the Born to Run movement, where these hunter-gatherers were always running. And they asked the hunter-gatherers that still exist in our world, are you, how many miles are you running a day? And they just kind of looked at them like they always look at us like we're crazy, because, you know, their whole family, their whole clan, their whole tribe is moving. And so you can't expect grandma to run 30 miles a day, but being active. And so one of the things that I've been really interested in, because my performances nowadays are more professional. Like I want to bring my best self, whether it's today where I'm doing some work, I'm prepping for a training, or whether it's Friday when I'm going to be in Texas in front of a large group doing a presentation. For me, it's kind of like, how do I live the best, healthiest, longest, happiest life? And what I think I'm seeing in the research, Dave, and what I've started to incorporate into my own life, because I see it keeps my heart rate variability at a really high level, is walking. Is walking, like, you know, and Dave, I know you and I've talked about this a lot as well. It's movement as much as exercise. And I think that is where I'm seeing in the research, it's not necessarily like you're healthier if you can run a marathon. In fact, you sort of see some things that say, maybe with injury and other stresses and strain on your body, that might not be the healthiest choice. Whereas walking, maybe 4 or 5 miles, great for their stress response because we work that cortisol off. Very low level for injury. And it just might be the healthiest thing you can do for your psychology, biology, and overall health. So Dave, this is kind of what I'm seeing to the confidence level where I can say it out loud, because I think there's enough trends there, but I'd love to see what you're kind of seeing in your research as well.
So without a doubt, the only thing that I would add to that is walking in nature.
Yeah.
You know, versus on a city street or something, if it is available to you to walk, you know, in nature somewhere, or at least where that is quite visible, the trees, the skyline, all of that kind of stuff, which is very stimulating to your parasympathetics, right? Which is when we talk about HRV, that is what is going to raise that on up. And yes, the move away from it always has to be intense. It always has to be pedal to the metal. And the focus on recovery is getting better, you know, is getting bigger and bigger. You know, and I think some of that too is that, you know, we're so ingrained in the HRV world that's what we see a ton of too. But without a doubt, that long, slow, cardiovascular base kind of work, like walking, like, you know, and like you said, Matt, it's not specifically walking, but it's moving. It's doing some sort of low intensity movement. That is so great for your entire body. And like you said, especially in a world like we live in today, when it comes to the mental health aspect of it, you know, that's almost you know, in a lot of regards, outweighs the physical health benefits that you see. You know, just getting out, going for a walk, you know, being away from your electronics. You know, that is an amazing thing that you can do for yourself. But the always on, the always high intensity, that has been showing that, you know, that leads to injury. You know, it's not sustainable. That's not what we were made to do. Recovery needs to be the primary, you know, and you guys were talking about the hunter-gatherers. And even within the, you know, within that, it wasn't like they were running, you know, they definitely weren't running a marathon. They definitely weren't sprinting nonstop all day, right? That was short burst. And once they got what they needed, they mostly just hung out. You know, it wasn't
stayed safe. That's right.
Right. It was not a constant go.
Because you can't afford those calories. I mean,
That's
if
right.
you burn twice the amount of calories as the gazelle or deer or whatever you're chasing, I mean, that's kind of why they laughed at the Western scientists. I think it's like, well, we'd have to hunt twice and gather twice as much if we did that. So yeah, I think our Western mind, when we put it on there, we like to glorify that, but they just think we're ridiculous, which I love too.
And to that point, we have food so abundantly available.
Yeah.
We have those resources so abundant for most of us, to where the need for calories to be taken in is it's low for most of us. That's easily achievable with very few calories burned.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I'd like to throw out another kind of question I have, and I haven't necessarily seen the answer out there, but I'd love to get your thoughts on it, even if neither of us maybe have the science to back it up. One of the questions I had, this kind of got brought up with my own HRV score, is I was able to get a black bump day in on the slopes on my snowboard recently, which is not as glorious as it seems. It's an old tall dude trying to get down moguls. That's what it is, and I've learned to enjoy it.
You normally see maybe one snowboarder going down a bump run, and they're never 6'7". So it's a sight to behold if you.
But we can hit our chest and say we do black bumps at the end, which is what I wanted to do as a new snowboarder. The interesting thing, and this is what I'd love to get your thoughts on, is I woke up then the next day when I had to work in the red. And I think one of the things that I don't hear people talk nearly enough, because the HRV arena, it seems like there's the folks in the elite athlete world. And that's where most of, I think, at least the public face of HRV has been historically. Research-based, there's other things about mental health and all those. But I don't hear really anybody talking about is I do black bumps, I kill my old butt on the slopes, and then I wake up in red the next day. Now I know a good workout where I don't get hurt is not something that's bad for me, but I also know that red day, I'm not going to be as productive at work as well. And I just kind of wonder, these two things, I haven't seen them brought together in the research out there or any of the other apps, other podcasts kind of talk about this. So I kind of wonder, your idea is obviously physical activity is a form of stress. It can get our HRV into red, which means our body's trying to recover. And I'm assuming with just putting the science that I know together, that is going to lower my work performance the next day. I'm not going to be quite my best self. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, absolutely. And that's Dr. Bruce Lipton, if you guys are familiar with him. Like he has said, you have the 3 T's that will bring you into stress, right? Or your body into that sympathetic fight or flight mode. You have toxins, thoughts, and trauma, which in your case, Matt, you're using trauma, which any form of movement would technically fall under. But when you have a large amount of any of those, you're going to push yourself into what would be a red category or a low HRV day, and without a doubt, when you talk about the autonomic nervous system, when it is not functioning well, you are not functioning well, and HRV, of course, being a measure of autonomic function, we can correlate that very, very easily to say, okay, if your HRV is low, we know that mentally you're not going to be functioning well, right? Is it because your brain is inflamed? Is it X, Y, or Z? Well, we know for sure that your frontal cortex is not going to be functioning optimally. Are you going to do as well in business meetings? Are you going to do as well on a math test? Are you going to do as well on anything? No. Even just driving your car and planning out your day is going to be tough on a day like that. Same with emotions. You'll be very dysregulated emotionally as a result too. So I would love to see you standing on a snowboard at 6'7", going down moguls too.
It's a sight.
Just pull up a chair. It takes a little while, but I get down eventually.
It does.
It would be cool.
He's not doing himself credit. He does very well.
I do black bumps. So yeah,
Exactly.
that's what I can say. I do black bumps.
You're doing it. But like you said, you wake up in the you wake up in the red, and that would be anybody who stressed themselves with something abnormal. Right. If like back to when I was talking about exercising like crazy, as an athlete. If you're an athlete, that's just what you do every day. Like my mom is in her mid 60s, and she does more marathons a year than most people will do in a lifetime. And for her, running 10 miles is no big deal, because that's just what her body does. Right.
That's not trauma for her, right?
Right. It is.
Yeah. She's built herself up to where that's just normal. Yeah.
Right. And but for me or you or most people listening, if we went out and ran 10 miles, our body, our brains, everything about us is going to be functioning horribly for 2 or 3 days to recover from that. So that's also another big factor that comes in, is what do you do every day? If Matt did Black Diamond moguls every day, it might not be affecting him as much. But that's another big factor that you also have to look at, is that how novel is this? How novel is this to your body? But yeah, Matt.
I think that it's a really interesting point for sort of the common person, the lay person, so to speak. As you say you set yourself a goal to run a marathon for the first time, or half marathon, or 10K or 5K, or whatever that is, right? That you're training up for you're going to do it in June. So you've set, to your point, Dr. Dave, you set your training goal. What are you going to do each weekend? All that kind of stuff. But Matt, if you're not tracking your HRV and you've got a really important meeting on Monday morning, and you're following that training regimen, and you've got your long run scheduled for Sunday, but you show up for your Monday morning meeting groggy and sore and tired, and your HRV is 30% lower than your baseline, and you didn't do yourself a service, right? You probably should have trained. You should have trained smarter. I think everybody would agree their professional performance is more important than trying to run that first 10K. So, for the folks listening, that's how you can leverage this technology in the day-to-day. You're not training for professional fights or whatever. You don't necessarily need to be going down double diamonds on your snowboard trying to pass people on the bumps like Matt does. But
I don't pass anybody, Jeff. Let's be very clear. There is no speed going down. My snowboard is larger than most people. So
that's true.
It is a very strategic down the moguls. Don't think there's any speed involved in this thing.
But we can all utilize this information in ways that we probably didn't think of, to make sure that we're doing what we want to physically, but also showing up and performing in whatever it is we want to show up and perform Monday through Friday. And I think that's a big takeaway that probably a lot of people aren't really thinking about.
And I worked on this analogy that I'd love to get, especially Jeff, you raising 2 small kids. Dave, I know you got kids at home.
Dr. Dave's
but I know Dave's going to find time to exercise. I don't worry. If he's got to wake up at 2:30 a.m., I bet Dave works up at 2:30 a.m. because I know that's not that far off. But this analogy that I've been working on for several years right now, it's almost when you think about a grape that's used for a fine wine. Like if you look at areas of, the country or the world that grow good, that have great wine, they have a climate that has a lot of heat and a lot of cold. There's that fluctuation of the environment. So, what I think is interesting, if you start to, and this has been like an intellectual challenge for me, if you stop putting health into buckets. So mental health goes over here, physical health goes over here, social health, correlated. Spiritual health, medical health. And because HRV measures all those, so kind of like, if you put those, is like kind of what we want to do is, what's your goal? So if your goal in life is to run a marathon, obviously you're going to look at your HRV different. If your goal in life is to be the best parent you want to be, you want to have some energy at the end of your day to be that best parent. If I want to give the best presentation I possibly can on Friday in Fort Worth, I'm gonna schedule my week in a way where hopefully I'm like you said, Dave, peaking there. But like, we want to be that grape for good wine. We don't want to become a raisin. And I think that's the message we've gotten historically with exercise is push yourself, push yourself, push yourself. But I've been really thinking
building,
about,
right?
yeah, challenge. What is your goal? What is most important in your life? And like everything else, exercise needs to fit into that. So yeah, I want to be a great husband. I want to be great at what I do professionally. Those are my key things. I want to live a long, healthy life. And so I'm trying to say maybe a vigorous exercise once a week, maybe twice a week, where I'm working up a sweat is probably all I need. And then I better move the rest of the time. So I need to go out and get some walking in because it's going to snow here in Denver. So that's the time. So I've been like, what is your goal? And then what are maybe your objectives and other sub goals around that? And then thinking about movement versus hardcore exercise to get there. So you still want to stress your body a little bit, which a 5-mile hike will do. But you don't want to burn yourself out because you don't want to be a raisin at work. You don't want to be a raisin as a parent. You want to be that really robust grape. And that's all I know about wine. So I'll stop there.
Well,
agreed.
To your point, Matt, that's exactly it, and that's where we've had discussions about your coefficient of variation with your HRV, like how much it swings up and down, and that's extremely great for you. That's what you want to see, is that you are stressing yourself and you're allowing your recovery, and then you can start to and then you can start to as well. Adding that in, looking at your trends throughout the week, yeah, you can peak perfectly, and that's the power of it. But I like that, bringing it back to what's your goal in life. That's what it's always where it's always at. So that's awesome.
Yeah, Jeff. So I know we've been talking a lot. We got a couple minutes left. I want to kind of end on asking you a question, because I've known you long enough where I've seen different stages in Jeff's life. And while Jeff may not have played collegiate or pro, Jeff can kick your butt at almost any skilled sport out there. And I have proof in my own experience that he can kick my butt in most anything, maybe with the exception of basketball. And I think that's even a question nowadays as well. So
with
Jeff,
the exception of basketball,
I've watched you like change your life dramatically over the last couple of years, where I know probably exercise has maybe worked its way a little bit down the priority list just because you have 2 young kids, new family at home. You've got these now, big jobs that you're taking on. So I kind of like to end as your life I've watched it change dramatically. HRV has come into it as well. I love to like kind of end up to see what insights you might have both on this conversation and just in your own life.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, I think for better or for worse, I use HRV less than you guys in terms of like planning actually what's going to happen in my day, and more just to set an expectation for myself. So to your point, Matt, I used to be very active, do multiple, I've done marathon, typically would do multiple half marathons, finished in the top 5 to 10% of the people that would, take place in them. Obviously not professional, but, before kids, that was a very important part of my life. And I made a lot of time for that. The last 4 years since kids, it's whenever I can, however I can. So, I bought a treadmill for the room. I've got a walking treadmill desk. So I take calls working while I'm walking, and I crank it up to a 10 and I get a little bit of a sweat. And, that's more of my workout now than it ever was before, but it's still important. But instead of waking up saying, oh, here's my number, I'm going to change my plan for the day. It's more like, okay, to your point, Dave, I know I'm going to be a little bit more edgy, or I know I need to be a little bit more patient than I feel with the kids, or, just mentally preparing myself for the, for the expectation of what's real for me that day. And so, if I did have time for a longer run that day and I wake up and I'm way well below my average, then I probably won't do that. I'll do something different. But it less organizes my activities and more sets an expectation on what's real for me in that day with 2 kids under 4 and under 5, I should say, and everything else. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I watch you parrot, man, and woo, you're amazing at it. But I get exhausted just watching you. So,
well, luckily for me, I'm different than you guys. So hearing your swings in HRV for both of you is incredible. Where mine lives, within like a 10 or 15 point world. My lows don't get low, and my highs don't get that nearly as high. So I don't know if that's better or worse. I mean, there's probably not. It's neither nor. But I think it sort of helps me stay consistent with them from an energy standpoint, from a mood standpoint, from an emotional standpoint. Hopefully, anyway, that's how I justify it. So anyway, this has been a longer than expected podcast. It's always a pleasure, Dr. Dave. Thank you so much. Your experiences, I think, are very beneficial for everyone. As a professional athlete, as a father, as somebody who's so interested in movement and exercise, and sharing how HRV kind of helps you on a day-to-day. Matt, same thing, as always. Until next time, we appreciate everybody's interest and listening to us have fun chatting with each other for the last 40 minutes.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
See you later.